No. Try to pause it.
Our presentation today. It is lovely to have you all with us. We are glad to have you join us today for a welcome for Building Fences, Not Walls, a conversation about boundaries. We're really glad you could join us today to talk about the importance of good boundaries at work and at home and everywhere in between. My name is Denise Permay. I'm the Associate Director of the DC Bar Lawyer Assistance Program. In the Lawyer Assistance Program, as in most counseling programs, many of the clients we see come in with a level of stress that is, at the end of the day, often related to their ability to set and maintain good boundaries. We don't always realize that our stress is boundary related. We often think our stress is related to other people asking too much of us, there being too much work, too much on our plate, too many demands, too many asks. But as we will talk about today, improving our ability to be firm about what we can do and about what we want to do can make a big difference in how we manage our responsibilities and how we feel. Improving our boundaries will not magically take away all our stress, of course, but it is a good place to start. I would like to introduce the staff of the DC Bar Lawyer Assistance Program who will be presenting this important material today. Nikki Irish is our Outreach and Education Coordinator and presenter par excellence. And joining Nikki are our two LAP senior counselors, Jesse Jochum and Sharon Greenbaum. They are our clinicians on the front lines, helping clients improve their boundaries and their self-care. I will be watching the chat today, so if you have questions as our presentation progresses, please feel free to ask them in the chat and we will try to get to everyone's questions. Again, thank you all so much for being with us today. Nikki, Jesse, and Sharon, I will turn things over to you.
Thanks so much, Denise. So I have to admit, when we decided to do this program, we weren't sure how many people would be interested in this topic in the middle of July. We thought everybody might be on vacation. 150 registrants later, we were clearly very wrong. We received a lot of great feedback around boundary questions and challenges. And so many, in fact, that we will probably not be able to answer all of them directly today. We did kind of categorize and group the questions with the intent to provide some framework and insight into the specific questions and areas of challenge. So our aim today is really to touch on permission giving, exploring the challenges, the reminder of the importance of practice, how to communicate, and then kind of tolerating discomfort. So those are kind of our 5 goals. In the next 55 minutes, we'll see what we can do. We will also send out some resources after the program. And as always, you're invited to reach out to the Lawyer Assistance Program for help. With that, we also want to acknowledge that some spaces can be toxic and boundaries may not be respected. And if you find that to be the case, 2 questions we want you to think about are, is there a possibility of developing a long-term plan of leaving the situation? Circling back to remember to ask for help, Lawyer Assistance Program and other resources are available. And then how do I take care of myself while I remain in that space? So as we dive into the topic today, we want to create a space really where people can ask questions, where they can share concerns, helpful hints. So this space is for you. Please use it to your benefit. It's meant to be a space that allows for authenticity and vulnerability. So in that vein, I'm going to introduce myself as a human who grew up in a household with 2 parents with a lot of trauma in their background. There's a lot of codependency. So I vacillated kind of wildly between very porous boundaries, like saying yes to everything, burning the candle at both ends, and then kind of very rigid boundaries. So not trusting people and then not letting people in, right? Kind of depending who I was interacting with. And it was only through a lot of kind of time and pain and a lot of bibliotherapy and real world practice that I was able to kind of figure out what I needed and what healthy boundaries look like. Boundaries for me now are about maintaining my well-being so I can be the human I want to be in the world, right? Caring for others in my professional life and being there for myself, my family, and my friends. When I think about boundaries, I think about trying to say no and yes based on my values and my priorities, kind of versus what others expect of me. And that's really changed my relationship to kind of that overwhelm. It doesn't mean I don't experience overwhelming chaos. I have small children, I'm a social worker, and I'm married to a lawyer. It's just now I think about what I'm saying no to when I say yes. I think about non-negotiables. I think about am I listening to a should or a want? And I think about what's in my control. So basically, I just do a lot more thinking. So what I want to start with because I think that's the most important part is the permission, that it's okay to have boundaries. It's actually essential to have boundaries kind of everywhere. And I'm going to hand it off to Sharon, wondering if she can talk a little bit more about what boundaries are and maybe give us some examples of that.
Thanks, Nikki. So the way that I like to think about it, so there's a range, right? From porous to rigid. I think a good way to think about it is like your skin, right? It's firm yet semi-permeable. It keeps the bad out, it holds the good in. It's adaptable. And boundaries are learned, right? Where our family of origin is or how we grew up in terms of our culture and our family. We aren't born with the knowledge on how to set healthy boundaries. We might actually learn a lack of boundary setting, depending on how we grew up. So that influence is really strong. And there's also two parts to it. There's identifying what I will and will not accept, and then communicating those needs, which is what really matters to you.
So then, Jessie, can you talk a little about why they are important?
Well, I think the first thing you want to consider what happens when you don't have healthy boundaries. Life can be chaotic. You can feel overwhelmed. Healthy boundaries are necessary components for your self-care, and it's also about your self-esteem, because it says, I value myself and my time. And it also can lead to healthier relationships. That one person you're so fearful about establishing boundaries with, that person may be receptive to it. They may feel like they're being expected to do a lot. So it can really, if you consider, it can build trust in that relationships, because if you don't have healthy boundaries, you feel depleted, you feel taken advantage of, you feel like people often are asking too much from you. And then what happens? You end up feeling resentful, hurt, angry, and you end up feeling burnt out at the end. And you're not getting what you need from that relationship or that friendship or that, that partner, because all of these things are happening, you're not communicating it. So it's really about your self-care, your self-esteem, and the value of that relationship.
And with that, what we wanted to do was start a little bit with a poll so we could kind of normalize the experience of boundaries. So there are kind of 3 brief questions, if you can just take a minute. The first one is talking about kind of what resonates for you in relation to signs maybe that you need some boundaries. Then we're interested in kind of the one area that you most want to improve your boundary setting. And then I'll let number 3 speak for itself. Oh no.
Yeah, the poll,
It's not actually fill outable.
no. There's no way to click an answer. I was definitely going to click the I frequently daydream about dropping everything answer, but
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, sure.
Well, how about so I think the problem is I may have shared it earlier, and then click polls at the bottom of the screen. Okay, can you try clicking polls quizzes at the bottom of the screen? And then will it let you select the answer? That worked. Awesome. Thank you, Drake. All right, we have somebody that had answered. It's working for people. Give everybody just another moment or two. I'm going to share results. We got like 75%. That's a pretty good, solid amount. So a lot of the reason we wanted to do this poll is really to normalize, right? Like where everybody notices the signs that we need boundaries. And I say the winner is, I feel burnt out, with 26 out of 40 people saying that, and also feeling overwhelmed. So 21 out of 40 people saying that's a sign for me that I'm experiencing that I need boundaries. And then the two winners in kind of the area that we want to improve boundary setting is time. So like giving time to myself, to things that increase my well-being and the workplace. And based on kind of the questions that were submitted, those would have been our guesses as well. And then I've done uncomfortable and hard things in the past. True. And a few people, which I might say that too sometimes is true, but I don't want to do more hard things. I'm all done doing hard things. So thank you everybody for participating with that. Anybody notice anything or jump out at them? You're welcome to put it in the chat or come off mute. You're also welcome not to notice anything too. Yeah, feeling more than one answer, right? There's a lot of times we get multiple signs that we need to set boundaries. And sometimes we get different signs in different areas of our life that we need boundaries, which is, I think, is something important to think about. I might notice something at home that I don't notice at work. So it doesn't mean everything. And that, yes, everyone's burned out in the legal profession. I think that is maybe just in the world. It's 2022 after all. But one of the things we want to talk about is the challenging part. Yes, thank you. I feel like we all know or can recognize after the fact regarding boundaries, but sometimes in the moment, it feels easier to kind of get swept up in things. And that's really a perfect pivot. So thank you, into the challenging part, right? Is that it can be really hard to identify our needs if we're not stopping and noticing them. So really before we're doing anything else, often we need a pause. And it's not meant to be a long, protracted pause. If you have time for that, great. But sometimes it's just literally about kind of like taking the breath, noticing what's happening for me. Am I noticing something in my body? Am I noticing feelings that are arising? And then what are they trying to tell me? Because feelings are data points. They're nothing more than information trying to tell us something. I could repeat that every day, probably for the rest of my life. Like that would be the one thing I would want people to know, right? Feelings are data points. They're just trying to tell us something about what we need or what we think or what we're experiencing. So challenge, though, it can be hard to identify our needs if we do not stop and notice them. Also acknowledging challenging are a lot of us maybe are people pleasers and or perfectionists. Not that I've noticed that in my clients at all. And that makes it extra challenging, right? And then the other is we're often pulled in these multiple directions. So we have a conflict between different parts of our lives, and then figuring out how to prioritize them in a way that we are setting boundaries all of those things can be really challenging. Sharon, I know one of the other things maybe is that what else is like kind of uncomfortable and challenging?
I think it's really hard for a lot of people to ask what we need, right? Or to tell others what we need. It's really about tolerating the discomfort that we're going to upset somebody, or we're going to let ourselves down, right? Like there's going to be a sacrifice somewhere. I know a lot of you asked about these feelings in your questions, and we're definitely going to get more to into the discomfort in a little while. So don't worry, we will get there.
But I think, Sharon, another thing, kind of like from what you're saying, not just the discomfort and recognizing it's going to take time. Boundary setting is time and practice. It's not, you're not going to establish new boundaries and everyone's going to respect your boundaries. It's going to be an easy adjustment. because you have established boundaries, that doesn't mean everyone in your circle, whether it be work or your personal life, are going to respect that. They're going to push back because this is not how we interact. This is not what we've expected of you. So there is going to be a pushback. So what, as Sharon is saying, is your level of discomfort is, okay, I can't control the fact that you won't respect my new boundaries. I need to figure out what I have the control over and start working from that perspective once I've set my boundaries. And I also think it's important to recognize that there are going to be places where boundary setting is going to be hard to put into place, whether that's with your family system, whether that's in the workplace. There are going to be certain environments where boundaries are going to be a lot harder. And another thing I do want to highlight, the cultural aspect. There are certain cultures, boundaries is just not a thing. You know, there are cultures where everything's very individualistic, where cultures are respected, but there are cultures where community is more important than the individual. And the expectation is that you sacrifice in a lot of ways your own personal needs and desire for the overall community's benefit. So that may be areas, especially if that's your family of origin, where cultures where boundaries was not set, it is going to be harder to put into place in those areas.
I think that's really important too, and kind of circles back to the first part though, is remembering that you do have permission to set them, right? You may not be getting that permission from your family, but as mental health providers, we want to give you permission to set boundaries because it is how you maintain your well-being. But that is intention, right? That's in regular conflict and figuring out how to set boundaries so I stay healthy while still maintaining relationships that are important to me. But what we do want to say is it will get easier with practice. I know that's an annoying thing to say. To date myself a little bit, what goes through my head when I say that is Allen Iverson's like practice. No, like it's hard, right? It's not a thing we love doing, but it will get better. Just like what I think about is kind of right in law school. Speaking as not a lawyer, but I am married to one and have seen a lot of them. Like your brief or memo that like you are learning to write. And then the first year of practice, writing a brief or memo is so overwhelming, right? But by year 10, it's a lot easier. You at least have framework. You at least know how to approach it. Maybe the subject is still a little bit challenging because it's something new, but you have years of practice to kind of rely on. So if you can remember that, the more you do it, the easier it will become. And just like that kind of more we do things that are uncomfortable, the more comfortable we can get with the discomfort. Jesse, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind when you're talking is fear, because again, we're putting to place something that we've never done in these relationships. And our brains are automatically going to start going to these negative thoughts. Well, I put these boundaries. This person is not going to like me. My work, I'm going to get fired in my workplace. All of these things, again, our brains are going to start thinking about all these negative things that are going to happen if we put those boundaries into place. But recognizing that that's fear and it's a thought, and not every thought we have is true. And we have to sometimes bring ourselves down. We're saying, okay, how much truth is my brain really speaking to me right now? Is this really going to happen if I put this boundary into place?
I think also to add to that, just because it's hard doesn't mean that it's not something that we have to do, right? Like we can do hard things, not to quote a favorite podcast of ours, but it's important that we don't listen to the fear and we don't make the decisions from the fear, because we want to make sure that we're making good decisions for ourselves and those around us. Otherwise, what happens? We sacrifice our own mental health.
Yep. And the comment in the chat, right? We rarely make good decisions from places of fear. We make survival decisions often, right? Like we can survive, but making kind of decisions around thriving is rare around fear-based decisions. So we're gonna attempt this poll one more time, a different poll one more time, and see how this works. Let's see. Actually, Sharon, I might need you to do it. Thank you.
That look great.
Yep. because we're going to get into a little bit more meatier topic, and we thought it might be good to have some awareness for yourself on where some of your challenges are. Give it just another moment or two. And as everybody's doing the poll, I will remind you, you are welcome to kind of ask any questions, share. I know some people have been using the chat. I appreciate it. But this space is really intended to be free. Right. Looks like most people have stopped answering. Oh, no, got a couple more. Okay, share the results. So reasons you may struggle with people respecting boundaries. Let's see. Every single one got answered, but so clearly they were relevant to somebody. But the kind of three I think that stood out is, let's see, allowing too much flexibility. You haven't verbalized your boundaries. We kind of keep them all in our head, and that you've kind of always done the thing, so people expect it from you, which can make it harder to start implementing a new boundary when there's kind of an established pattern, right, of expectation. And then things that get in the way of setting boundaries. So the thoughts that are running through our head are beliefs often. So I'm worried about being rude. I am a people pleaser, and it's important for me to make others happy and to make them like me, or whatever that might be. You get value from helping others. That makes sense. Helping profession, right? Lawyer is a strong helping profession. And then I think the one too is the anxiety about future interactions after the boundary's been set. So I'm going to leave it out open for a minute. If there's anybody that noticed anything that jumped out, did anybody feel kind of validated that everybody is also struggling with some of these things? Do they feel seen, hopefully, because that's part of the goal? Well, then we're going to jump into the next part and just talk about some kind of feeling very seen. Yes. All right. We have accomplished what we're here for. We're going to talk a little bit about concrete ways to communicate. So I'm going to hand it over to Jessie to do that.
So this is probably the biggest struggle that I hear from clients. Like, I know I need boundaries, but how do I communicate it? So I'm hoping, if anything, take away, there's three things you got to keep in mind about communicating your boundaries. Is one, assertiveness is the key. You have to be assertive, okay? Not aggressive, but assertive. Two, state your needs or request. And I'm going to give credit to Nikki for this one. No is a complete sentence. There does not have to be anything else. Saying no is a sentence. And then the third key is be consistent in your words and your actions. Restate your needs if you feel like it's necessary. So with regard to being the assertive, you got to be clear, straightforward, be as precise as possible in why you're setting these boundaries. If you feel like you need to explain why the way things are currently in this relationship is not working. If it's a situation like, for example, I often had an individual who shared with me that they had a friend who will always call late, calling them at midnight or 11 o'clock. And the person will always answer and stay on the call and talk and talk and talk. Mind you, the person had to wake up 5 o'clock in the morning to get ready for work. But they allowed that communication and never expressed it. So once they started expressing it, of course, the person pushed back. That's when that person started getting blocked. So it's by explaining why this no longer works for you and why you need a change. Again, state your needs or requests. I can't work on this on Tuesday, but if you need it, I may be able to find another individual who may be able to assist you. Or I can't get this on Tuesday. Can I get it Tuesday morning? Can I get this to you Tuesday afternoon? and be consistent and restate your needs. Now, I'm not saying every single time, and I'm gonna toss this to Sharon in a few minutes. I'm not saying every single time this person crosses or violates your boundaries, you have to explain it to them. You don't have to explain every single time, but there is gonna be, again, this person is so, if this is an established relationship, this person is so accustomed to things being the way it is. They are going to have to adjust and they're not gonna like it. So you may have to, again, have that latitude where you do explain it. Now, after fourth, fifth time, they're not violating, you shouldn't have to keep explaining yourself to them. At this point, they're not respecting your boundaries, and there needs to be consequences for them not respecting it. So Sharon, I'm gonna talk to you. What about someone crosses and violates your boundary?
Yeah, so I wanted to first explain what we're talking about here, right? So there's obviously, again, like I say, there's a range. It's what therapists do, not one thing or the other. So they're going to be that you're crossing a boundary, like always sometimes feels like not okay, and then there's something where it's always not okay, right? So that's a violation versus a crossing. So how do we recognize when there is a crossing? It's really about, how are we feeling? What are we noticing within ourselves, right? Does something feel uncomfortable? And then, some things that we hear from clients are, just seeing the name on an email cause us to feel a little bit anxious or tense. Is it an interaction that you're feeling exhausted by, right? Where you feel like you need to put up some kind of a boundary for yourself. Ways that we can sort of think about these things, like Jesse was saying, assertively restate your needs. But things that we also want to take into account are to not take it personally, right? You're asking someone to do something and they might feel super uncomfortable with what you're asking, but guess what? That's not your problem, right? You have to state your needs, and then that is their reaction, right? That might sound super harsh.
Well, it
Okay.
is our problem in that we have to tolerate it, right? But it
Of
is not our
course.
response. It's not our responsibility.
It is
And I
not
think
our
that's-
responsibility. Yeah, it's their reaction, right? And you're responsible for how you react to someone else's boundary setting, right? We don't set boundaries on other people, right? They might have a certain feeling about it, but we have no control over it. And like Nikki said, it's the responsibility. And so really it's about focusing on what we can control, and it's about managing our discomfort, which we're going to get into.
Go ahead, Jess.
Oh wait, did someone want to, Margaret, I saw you unmuted. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I did. Well, I did ask in the chat. You said, you have to, if somebody keeps violating your boundaries, there will be consequences. And I'm wondering if you can name some consequences. I think that's sort of like step 2,
Gotcha.
no.
So I would say it depends on what the boundaries you're trying to set with that person. If it's, for example, this last few weeks has been very challenging. A lot of tough cases been going on in the news. And one of those boundaries, we've heard from people is that at a certain point, I don't want to talk about this. I'm gonna put it, the Supreme Court cases. Some people have said, after a certain period, I got tired of talking about it. My friends kept bringing it up. And people had to say to, listen, I've asked you, I don't want to talk about this. This is very difficult for me, and I'm asking you not to bring it up. If they bring it up, then either the consequence has to be ending that conversation.
Right. So it could look like, I'm going to hang up I need to get off the phone. It could be you literally just changing the subject. It could be not answering the call the next time the person calls, because they kind of, maybe like this past week, they're in this past couple of weeks, they're in a space of like constantly talking about things you don't want to talk about, and you just text them, right? So it kind of depends on where you are in your relationship to them, but it's about, the consequence should be strongly related to what your need is. What do I need in this situation, and how do I get that need met? My need, in what Jesse was talking about, is I don't want to talk about the news right now. So how do I get that need met? I leave the conversation. I don't answer the phone. I change the subject, whatever that might be. But I think it's really comes back to that thing in the beginning on, what do I need right now and how do I get that need met, tells me what those consequences are. And I think sometimes they can be small, or sometimes I was just thinking about kind of like, we have a rule at the dinner table, we don't check our phones at the dinner table when I have dinner with our kids and my husband. And like, I turned around the other day and my husband is checking his phone. I'm like, what are you doing? Right? Like, he violated the boundary, like the household boundary rule. He was able to articulate, I have a filing at 5:30, like it's 5:15. I need to make sure this thing is like in and done. And I said, you know what? Okay, like that is a time I'm going to like let that pass. I didn't need to set that boundary at that point because it felt reasonable enough. It's not something he doesn't constantly cross the boundary, right? So it's also evaluating kind of, I could have overreacted and been like, no, the rule is we do not check the phone at the table, get up from the table and like leave the table, right? I could have done that. To me, that wouldn't have met my need. I want him at the table. I want the kids interacting with him. And if he needs to take 2 minutes to check an email, he can take 2 minutes and check an email, right? So I think sometimes it's also weighing what we want out of the situation and what we're willing to tolerate. Does that help?
Yes.
And I see Carolyn had a question. What if the other person is a position of power and does not let you leave the conversation, even when you have expressed your reasons why you need the boundary set at that time? That's a tough one. Oh no, go ahead. Shannon,
I was
go
gonna say, and Stephanie also wrote a similar question above. That is really tough. I'm curious if you want to speak more to it, if you want just in general. Does anybody want to speak to that?
I'll speak to it just because I don't mind talking. I think that especially in law firm environments where there is such an emphasis on client service, I see most frequently boundaries being violated by clients versus, even really being anyone internally violating those boundaries, right? And then it becomes, well, we have to because the client asked us, right? The client needs it. Or even if that might not be true, it's a fallback excuse for many senior lawyers to say, I already agreed to this with the client, and I'm not going back and having that tough conversation because you have, a 9 o'clock rule or a weekend with your kids boundary, right? All of those things, I think, add a level of complexity to boundary setting and legal that might not otherwise be there.
I think that's entirely true. There's this tension. I am married to a large firm attorney. And these are conversations we have regularly, right? Like occasional violations with like client, like, right? Occasionally I am willing to work till 10 o'clock, like whatever it is. But if it is routine, if this client is routinely doing this, if this partner is constantly putting me in a position where I have to constantly be missing out on time with my kids or missing out on vacation or whatever those things are, then that's a larger issue where it almost comes back to, is this a place that I can reside in? I was talking to a neighbor of mine who formerly worked at a big firm until like 2 weeks ago. And she's now taking a month off and now she's going to go work in-house. But she goes, you know what? It can't be worse. I just have to find out if it's different. Like, it wasn't working. She was trying to set boundaries and nobody was really respecting her boundaries because I think a lot of it was client issues. And she's going to go see what is different. And I don't mean that in any flippant way. What I mean is we try to set micro boundaries, we try to set them and we see what happens. And if they continually get rejected, we have to evaluate where our well-being is and what we're willing to do with it. And in the meantime, maybe we set micro ones on, I'm literally just going to leave my office for 30 minutes and I'm not going to check my email. I'm not going to take the walk and I'm going to come back and see if the world has imploded. And there's a lot to go deeper there that I think ends up being honestly like a lot of one-on-one work to see kind of what exactly is happening in the space and circumstance, and then like what micro boundaries you can start setting. And Jessie has a thought and I very happily hand it off to her.
No, I just kind of want to piggyback on what you're saying is that what are some small things we can do to set boundaries? Oftentimes, again, goes back to that fear. We think if we do this, all of these other things are going to happen. So we don't even try to even do small bursts of boundaries. For the workplace, can you take the email off your phone? So instead of getting those workplace emails at 10 o'clock or 9 o'clock, or can you set a message that after 10 o'clock, you don't get the ding, or 11 o'clock, again, whatever you feel comfortable with. Can you stop that from getting that message, that email's coming through, or workplace emails coming at 11 o'clock? What are those small things that you can try? Because here's the thing, if you don't try, you don't know if it's going to be respected. We think it won't be respected, so we don't try. And we continue the unhealthy patterns that we recognize is not working for us.
I want to validate Megan's, this is how it's always been done, right? Like she said, there's kind of this indirect response of like, that's the nature of the industry. You knew what you were getting into. And there's a lot of culture, right? Like, and different cultures are different, but within the legal community, there is a culture of that. And I think we're at the beginning of a conversation, right, that has been overdue for many decades, that we are now just having, right? Like where there is like a glacial movement to start to change it because people can't handle it anymore. Because it's not that they can't handle, that was a very wrong way to put it. Like they cannot, nobody's well-being can survive it, right? Like, so I just want to kind of acknowledge the truth of that. Yes, it's not sustainable. And that's exactly right. I asked my husband, I was like, what would you want me to talk? Like, what do you want me to do? Like in this presentation, like, what's the one thing, right? He's like, just permission. He's like, that's the thing I try to give the younger associates. It's like, you do have permission to set boundaries. It may not be every day, all the time, and in the exact way you would want them, but like finding the micro boundaries, because otherwise it isn't sustainable. And I wish I had a better like magic wand answer that I don't have. And I want to acknowledge that. And I want to actually connect that to the next part is like the managing your discomfort piece. And that we do that with reality, right? Like we do recognize that there is a culture that is unhealthy. But that a large part of practicing and trying to find where those micro boundaries are is about working through discomfort. And I want to take you back to that first poll, which Jesse's going to laugh at me about. The first poll, the bottom question, true or false? I have done hard things in the past, essentially, right? 100% of you said true. Like you got through law school or you're getting through law school. You've dealt with relations, like you've done very difficult, challenging things in the past. We may not feel like we have capacity for that at the moment because it is 2022, which I fully acknowledge. But it's one of the things I would say is remembering that we have done really hard things before and we can do them again. And I would want to acknowledge that uncomfortable feeling we get when we set boundaries, or anticipate setting boundaries, is usually the number one reason we avoid doing it at all. I don't want the guilt somebody is going to put on me was one of the questions. I don't want that person's anger. I do not want the disappointment that somebody is going to express when I say no or don't answer the phone, like whatever the thing is. Those feelings, right? That I'm going to feel guilty or afraid or sad or awkward. Those feelings aren't wrong. It doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. Right? Like discomfort is part of this process. And I actually think permission and discomfort are kind of the bookends of what you have to remember, right? I have permission to do it and I have permission to feel uncomfortable and I still need to choose to do it anyway. Because regardless, you're going to experience pain. If I don't set the boundary, I'm experiencing the pain of not setting the boundary, whatever it is I'm giving up, I'm sacrificing by not setting a boundary, or I'm choosing myself. And I'm going to choose to like feel the discomfort of other people's feelings, basically, in order to take care of myself. So boundaries are like damned if you do, damned if you don't in the moment, with the intention that there is long-term gain, even short-term, right? Like I said no to doing something and now I'm not doing the thing and I actually have a moment to myself. Yes. I'm circling back to, go ahead, Sharon.
I'm just going to add to that, I'm smiling, Megan, at your comment because it's really about sacrifice, right? I mean, something's going to give. So I feel what you're saying strongly because we hear that all the time from clients, right? And amongst us clinicians, like we talk about this all the time, right? Like, how do we address these concern within the profession, because it's true what you're saying. But like what Nikki said before, you know, if it comes to a point, right, there comes to a point with certain clients where it is their health, their well-being, over maybe their current role. And that is a one-on-one conversation, or we have support groups where we can talk to one another about, maybe it is about a different role or a different position. And Jesse, I see you smiling.
No, I was just smiling on the reference to the support group. Again, we hear it so much time about this boundaries, about the sacrifice. If I do this, if I don't volunteer to do these, if I don't take on these things, I'm gonna miss out on all these other either career things or personal moments because I say I need space or time. But I just want to kind of piggyback also what Nikki's saying about the guilt. There is going to be a level of guilt with this. Because we're setting these boundaries and we're feeling like, okay, I'm posing on other people. How is this going to impact them? And I'm going to feel guilty. And that guilt is what drives us to go back to saying, okay, I'm going to go ahead and keep doing these things. Because again, it's those emotions that make us return to those habits because we don't want to feel them. So one thing I would tell people, again, when you're starting with boundaries, start slow, set realistic expectations for yourself. Things are not going to change overnight, whether it's in your workplace or your personal life. It's going to take time. So set some realistic goals for yourself about what is this going to look like if this starts changing? What are some small things I'm comfortable with doing?
One of the things I would say too, I'm going to get the saying wrong or whatever, but like, right, it's dig where the ground is soft or whatever that is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you have areas in your life that don't feel quite as risky with boundary setting, right? Start there. Like if you're someone who doesn't set a lot of boundaries, but like there is a friend or a space that like feels a little safer to start setting boundaries and you need some practice, that's where you do it. Don't go like to the senior partner and say, I'm taking 3 weeks vacation and I'm never going to check my email. Like that's not where we start, right? Like we start where the ground is soft. So I think that's important to remember. Low hanging fruit, exactly. I think one of the things Jesse talked about before too, related to this, that I'd like to touch on is the thoughts, right? Like we have these thoughts in our heads, we have these beliefs, we have these assumptions. And that is often what causes the discomfort, right? I am a bad person because I'm not willing to sacrifice myself for someone else. I am a bad attorney because I am not willing to answer my client's call at 11 o'clock at night. I will be disciplined by ODC because I didn't get to this matter fast enough. Like whatever they are, right? But like it's getting curious about the thoughts that are associated with the feelings, and kind of testing them out and exploring them a little bit. Yeah, I just think that part's important. And also like remembering that emotions themselves only last about 90 seconds. Like the physical feeling in our body, science tells us it's 90 seconds. You can do anything for 90 seconds, right? So it's remembering I can survive this feeling. I am uncomfortable. I am setting a boundary. I must be doing it right. Like, right. It is about what we're telling ourselves. That is such an important part of like boundary setting in the discomfort of doing it.
I'm looking in the chat at Drake's question. I don't know, Drake, if you're comfortable coming on and chatting, but I want to hear more about that question in order to be able to answer it.
Sure. I'm trying to look at this in a morally neutral way. So it seems a little harsh to be like, I can't accept the boundaries of others. It makes me feel terrible. But the truth is that if I struggle to set boundaries with the people around me, I may feel uncomfortable when people come to me to share what they can or can't do. In my head, I may think, well, I would do that, I mean, so I have unrealistic expectations for the people around me. And so I see these more as like a two-sided coin than like there's people who always it's not one-sided, it's often two-sided. So I guess I wanted to talk about kind of the more subtle ways, or what are the signs I should look out for in myself and my relationships with others or colleagues, where it can clue me in that, wow, I'm the one who kind of needs to accept what this new reality is that this person is sharing with me, to either improve the relationship or just manage whatever it is we're working on together within the realistic resources and not what I think another person can do. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Thank you. And I think that that's a wonderful question. And I'm going to give you such a therapeutic response, which is you're already being curious and thoughtful. So you're probably already doing what you should be doing in that situation. It's the folks that aren't questioning, right? Who aren't trying to better themselves. But the fact that you're thinking that, you're probably already headed in the right direction. Jesse or Nikki, do you have anything more concrete than what I'm giving right now?
I would say communicate the same way that person has communicated their boundaries to you. Communicate back, like, am I respecting your boundaries? And again, we say boundaries, we're not actually having that communication. Am I respecting your boundaries, Sharon? We're not actually saying that boundaries, but it's being able to say, if someone says, like, you know what, I really don't have the time for this right in this morning, but can I get this afternoon? They're establishing a time boundary by saying that. Or, you know what, I know we made plans to go out, but I'm really tired today and I really just want to stay in. Sometimes we want to say, what's wrong? What's going on? We don't have to question why the person is making that request. We just have to respect that this is what they're stating they need. So it's just sometimes just about communicating.
I love the communication piece because I think that's key, right? Like you can't have boundaries without communication. I mean, you can, but it's useful to have communication, I guess. Well, one of the things I think that Jesse pointed out was really good is, so somebody says no to me, and I'm not used to people saying no to me because I don't say no to anybody else. I might notice something that happens, but I might not react, right? Like, and I think making those two distinctions are important, right? So I internally am like, what the heck? Why are they saying no? But I don't actually say that out loud to them. I say, okay, thank you for letting me know. And then I might turn around to Jesse and say, Jesse, what the heck? Why did that person say no to me? And that's okay, right? Like you respected their boundary and then you figured out how to process it in a way that is useful to you. And I think that's actually really important. That respecting boundaries isn't about not feeling things when people set boundaries, to us, like give us boundaries that we need to respect. It's about just accepting them. And then maybe we figure out how to process them on our own. Like we can have feelings and reactions to it. That is still respecting boundaries. It becomes not respectful when I start to try to then say, well, what if we did this? And how about this? And how do I get this thing I want you to do that you've already said no to? That becomes not respectful. Are all three of those answers useful at all? One of the things that Jesse said resonated a lot, just communication. At the end of the day, a bunch of the questions too that came in were like, when do I communicate? Like, when should I be setting boundaries? The answer is as soon as you recognize as soon as you can. One of the questions that kind of came in kind of said, like, basically, I often notice I'm already like angry, frustrated, resentful, missing a deadline. And then I really reinforce my boundaries, right? Which I think happens because we're not paying attention along the way. But just from a very practical standpoint, right? If I know something's due on Tuesday, it is now Monday at 5, and I'm just starting, and I'm probably not going to get the thing done. I don't wait till Tuesday at 5 to say, I just missed your deadline. On Monday, you would say, I'm really working on this. This is what's going on. Is there a way I can give it to you on Wednesday? Right? Don't wait till you actually miss the deadline. Don't wait till you miss the event. Don't wait till 5:55 when the event's at 6 o'clock to say, can't do it. If you have to, you have to, right? Like there's reasons, but the ideal is kind of as soon as you notice that you might need to communicate something is the best time to communicate it, because it shows respect, right? Like it shows that I am respecting like your time, energy, whatever. And it also gives the other person time to kind of accept what it is you're giving to them. what else about communication, Jesse and Sharon?
I was going to add to that. I like that a lot, Nikki. I think that if you can start to do that yesterday, right, which we will see with clients, a lot of, I mean, over the last few weeks, especially with what's been going on in the news, although that's more like the last 2 years, if something comes up, especially in the profession, when you're reading all the things that are happening, I'll just say in the news. I have a lot of clients who said, like, 2 weeks ago, I just had to say, I can't work anymore after 2 o'clock. Like I'm, shutting my computer. The folks that were able to do that had already been establishing boundaries before that, right? As opposed to even managers said, if you need to stop working, please take the day, right? Which is fantastic. But if you can start, like Nikki said today, it's going to get easier when you have to sort of have a like a more direct boundary that's happening in that moment.
And in the essence, like respecting time, I want to pull back really quick because I want to end in a way kind of coming back to the discomfort, because at the end of the day is that we're going to remind ourselves it's healthy to have boundaries. Other people have boundaries that you respect, right? And setting boundaries is a sign of a healthy relationship for yourself and for others. But if we're having trouble, whether it is tolerating the discomfort of setting them, whether it is tolerating the discomfort of somebody else's boundaries, it is about self-care activities and grounding, right? Like, so identifying techniques ahead of time that I might need to navigate the discomfort. So what I want you to do is write down 3 things that you can do when you're feeling uncomfortable to manage the discomfort. If you have any that jump out in your mind and you want to share them in the chat, we would love to do that because I think it can be useful for other people. One that I just gave you the example of is I just accepted somebody's boundary. I didn't like it. And then I turned to Jesse and was like, can we discuss this, please? I really need to like process what just happened, right? So connection, using other people, whether it is in conversation, in a text, in an email, but like using other people to help kind of process my discomfort can be useful. So anybody else that wants to jump in, feel free. Jesse and Sharon, do you have any thoughts?
I think sometimes, it's the same as when we deal or cope with anything. I mean, sometimes we have to get busy with something else, go for a walk, watch TV, whatever it is, not dwell on it, but say, okay, this is done. Now I got to move on to something else. I mean, I'm not saying don't feel the feeling but I think sometimes have a list of coping skills and
Mm-hmm. No, it's exactly right, right? Like, it's just how do we human? Like, because being human is all about tolerating feelings. So what are the ways we cope with that?
I would say also, when we start having those negative thoughts, what's another way to reframe it? We automatically start thinking that, okay, if I do these boundaries, I'm going to lose this relationship. But what if another way, maybe this relationship will be healthier? Maybe my communication with this person will actually start to improve, that when I see their call, I don't get this anxious state. I actually look forward to it. So a lot of those thoughts that we have, because if what all these things that could happen, is there a way for me to reframe this thought in another way, in a healthier way? Maybe the fact is, okay, maybe the fact in my job, I may not always have to work late. My boss is actually starting to respect the fact that when I'm on vacation, I've already communicated I'm not going to have my laptop and I don't respond to emails. And when I do put it out that I'm on vacation, they don't expect that.
When you say your boss, you mean that hypothetically?
Oh yes, not my boss. My boss is amazing.
Just kidding.
And I know that, we're all therapists, and we're always talking about processing and talking to our coworkers, and that might not be the case in every work environment, right? And it might not be your way of managing your discomfort in terms of, verbally processing. For a lot of clients, they journal every morning, right? I couldn't do that. I'm a verbal person. But if that works for you, that is something that's a great tool to have, right? Anything that helps you in managing the discomfort, whether it is during, before, or after, just knowing your tools, your toolkit, so that you have something you can use.
I really liked Mackenzie's comment, just thinking in terms of being a manager, right? Like if you have people you are supervising, how can you communicate to them kind of early and often that you do expect them to set boundaries, so they're not setting boundaries at the last moment or too late or when they're already burnt out. And we do that implicitly and explicitly, right? Like we explicitly can tell them that, but we also implicitly teach them, right? If my supervisor never takes breaks, is checking email 5 times a day on vacation, is answering calls, like that is implicitly telling people boundaries are not acceptable. So I think being conscious of that can be really important, of just kind of what you are communicating in different ways. Yes, I'm going to read this out loud, just to make sure everybody can hear this. I used to work as a firefighter prior to where I am now. There's a safety measure in EMS called scene safety. When you show up to a call, you need to look around for danger before you help the person with an emergency. The idea behind that is if you get hurt, you're no longer 100% helpful to the other person. I like to see the same when it comes to boundaries. If I'm not taking myself into consideration and setting boundaries, I start to feel burned out and overwhelmed. And then I then don't feel like I'm at 100% to help everyone around me. And I think that's exactly right. Right? It is about, you can't pour from an empty cup. It's all the things, right? The oxygen mask first. It's the cliches exist for a reason because they are true and important. And boundaries are all about that. That is what boundaries allow us to do. It is normal to struggle with boundaries. All of the 3 of us on here are all clinicians and have been for a long time, and we still have to deal with boundaries and figure out boundaries in our family and the workplace and in relationships. Like they're a constant thing we are evolving and working on. But one of the biggest things is paying attention to ourselves and what we need. And at the end of the day, that is the definition of self-care. Self-care is the ability to say, this is what my need is, and this is how I'm going to get it met. And boundaries are a way we get our needs met. If you have trouble with that, 1, it's normal, but 2, there are resources to help you, whether that is through the Lawyer Assistance Program, whether that is through some other resource. We are going to send out some resources. I put a link in the chat. Nedra Tawwab is a clinician who is just, I like wish I had read her when I was in my 20s. Like she has just the most amazing like nuggets of things on boundaries that I think are great. This is her book, Setting Boundaries, Find Peace. She has a workbook. So I just really appreciate everybody's time, effort, energy, and showing up today. You set a boundary today, right? Like you set a boundary that says from 2 to 3, I'm going to show up for myself and I'm going to attend this session. And I'm important and I want to learn more about boundaries. So everybody did it. Thank you. We're happy to kind of stay around and answer any questions that you might have. And I just really appreciate your time. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. We're so glad everyone was able to join.